The sun was barely showing through my window that April morning in Valencia when my eyes opened with a mixture of nerves and excitement. It was the day I had been waiting for the last 2 years, ever since Carlos knelt in front of me on that terrace of the restaurant next to the Central Market. On my wedding day, my sister Maria entered the room with a tray of café con leche and muffins freshly baked by my mother. "Wake up, sleeping beauty," he exclaimed with his characteristic enthusiasm. "Today is your big day, Anna." The aroma of coffee helped me wake up completely, while I tried to control the butterflies that were fluttering in my stomach. My parents' small house in the Carmen neighborhood was bustling with activity early on. My mother, Carmen, ran around making sure everything was perfect, while my father, Antonio, tried to keep everyone calm with his usual sense of humor. "Don't panic," he repeated with a laugh every time someone got upset over some minor detail. The dress, a simple but elegant design that she had chosen at a boutique near the Plaza de la Reina, hung majestically in the closet. I looked at it for a few seconds, still unable to believe that in a few hours I would be wearing it as I walked towards the altar of the Church of Santa Catalina, where Carlos and I would say, "I do." The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of preparations. The hairdresser, an old family friend named Lucia, arrived punctually at 9 to start on my hair and that of the bridesmaids. Between laughter and childhood memories, time flew while we prepared. My best friend Sophia kept showing me photos of how the decoration was looking in the church, with its arches of white flowers and gold bows that we had carefully chosen. Everything seemed perfect, even the weather favored us with a sunny day and a gentle Mediterranean breeze. The morning sickness of pregnancy, which had been bothering me for the past few weeks, seemed to have taken a break, as if even my 12-week-old knew that this day was special. As I put on the dress, with the help of my mother and sister, I couldn't stop some happy tears from escaping my eyes. "Don't cry, darling," my mother gently scolded me as she gently wiped my cheeks. "The makeup that Lucia put so much work into is going to run off." The clock read 11:30 when I was finally ready. The ceremony was scheduled for noon, and my father was already waiting in the living room, dressed in his best gray suit, ready to take me to the church. When she saw me coming down the stairs, her eyes filled with tears. "You look beautiful, my girl," he whispered as he hugged me, careful not to wrinkle the dress. The drive to the church was short, but every second seemed like an eternity. The cobblestone streets of Valencia's historic center passed before my eyes as my mind wandered through memories of my relationship with Carlos. Our first meeting in that cafeteria near the university, our long walks through the Turia garden, the first time he introduced me to his parents at their house in Ruzafa. Upon arriving at the church, my heart skipped a beat when I saw the number of people already waiting at the entrance. Friends, family, co-workers, all dressed in their best and smiling with anticipation. My main bridesmaid, Sophia, was waiting for me on the stairs with my bouquet of white roses and small orange blossoms, typical of Valencian weddings. But something in his expression made me doubt. His smile seemed strained, and I noticed he was constantly looking at his phone. "Is everything okay?" I asked as he helped me out of the car. Sure, he responded quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Just some last-minute nerves." The minutes began to pass, and anxiety began to grow among the guests. The ceremony should have already started, but Carlos did not appear. My father tried to remain calm, talking to the guests and assuring that it was probably just a traffic problem. My mother prayed silently, holding her rosary tightly. It was then that I saw Pedro, Carlos's best friend and his best man at his wedding, running across the square towards the church. His face was pale, and his hands trembled as he approached me. Time seemed to stop when our eyes met, and before he said a word, I knew something terrible had happened. "Anna," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry, but Carlos isn't coming." The words fell like a hammer on my heart. The bouquet slipped from my hands, the white roses scattering across the stone steps. The murmur of the guests turned into a distant hum as my world began to spin. "What do you mean he's not coming?" I managed, my voice sounding strange even to myself. Pedro avoided my gaze, his eyes fixed on the ground. "He called me half an hour ago. He said he couldn't do it, that you'd forgive him, but he's not ready for this step." The words hit me like slaps. He is not prepared. It doesn't come. He left me at the altar. And I carry his son in my womb. The thought of my pregnancy made the nausea return with a vengeance, and I had to lean on my father to keep from falling. The next few moments were a blur of worried faces, comforting voices, and unshed tears. My mother tried to get me away from the curious glances, guiding me towards the sacristy while my father was in charge of communicating the news to the guests. Sophia hugged me tightly, whispering words of comfort that I couldn't process. In the privacy of the sacristy, I finally broke down. The dress I had chosen with so much love became a prison of tulle and lace, and between sobs, I tried to tear it off. My mother and Sophia helped me sit down, while Father Miguel, the priest who was to officiate the ceremony, brought us a glass of water. "My girl," my mother whispered as she stroked my hair, like when I was little and hurt myself playing. But this pain was different, deeper, more heartbreaking. It wasn't a scraped knee that could be healed with a kiss and a band-aid. It was my heart that was bleeding, and there was no bandage that could stop that bleeding. The next few hours passed in a kind of haze. The guests left little by little, some leaving messages of support, others simply leaving in silence, uncomfortable in the face of so much pain. My sister Maria was in charge of calling the restaurant to cancel the banquet, while my father tried to contact Carlos's family, looking for answers that no one seemed to have. Sitting on a bench in the empty church, with my wedding dress wrinkled and my makeup smeared with tears, I felt like a protagonist of those soap operas that my grandmother loved so much. But this was not fiction. It was my life, my reality, and the pain was too real. Questions crowded my mind. Why? Since when did you know? What would happen to the baby? How could I face everyone after this? Each question brought with it a new wave of tears and despair. The sun was beginning to set when I finally agreed to go home. The same car that had taken me to the church full of hopes now returned me a shadow of myself. The streets of Valencia, which had seemed so full of promise that morning, now looked gray and hostile. When I got home, I locked myself in my old room, ignoring my family's attempts to make me eat something. I took off my dress with trembling hands and threw it at the back of the closet. I put on some old pajamas and curled up in bed, hugging my belly where the only vestige of the love I believed was real grew. The silence of the night was only interrupted by the occasional sound of messages arriving on my phone. He didn't want to look at it, didn't want to read the words of pity and compassion that it surely contained. He didn't want to see if there was any message from Carlos explaining his cowardice. At some point, exhaustion overcame the pain and I fell asleep, but even in my dreams I found no peace. Nightmares mixed with memories, and every time I woke up, for a brief moment I hoped it had all been a bad dream, only for reality to hit me again in all its harshness. The hours passed with unbearable slowness in that small room in my parents' house. The clock on the bedside table read 3 in the afternoon when I decided to finally look at my phone. Dozens of missed calls and WhatsApp messages filled the screen, but none from Carlos. My stomach hurt from crying so much, and the baby seemed to sense my distress, making me more nauseous than usual. Sophia had insisted on staying with me, but I asked her to leave me alone. I needed to process everything that had happened. The walls of my old room, still decorated with photos from my adolescence, seemed to mock my naivety. In one of them, Carlos and I were smiling at the phallus of the previous year, so happy, so oblivious to what the future held for us. My mother came in from time to time, leaving cups of lime blossom that cooled without being drunk. I could hear her talking quietly to my father in the hallway, arguing about what to do with all the wedding gifts that had arrived over the past few weeks. The apartment we had rented together in the Benimaclet neighborhood was full of unopened boxes, waiting for a life together that would no longer exist. That's when my phone started vibrating again. At first I thought about ignoring it, like I had with all the previous calls, but something made me look at the screen. The name that appeared made my heart stop for a moment. Mercedes, Carlos's mom. My mother-in-law, or rather, the one who should have been my mother-in-law. With shaking hands, I slid my finger across the screen to answer. For a few seconds, only silence was heard on the other end of the line. Then, his voice, cold as steel, cut the air like a knife. "You're finally answering," he said in a tone I'd never heard from him before. "I suppose you have already understood that this was the best for everyone." His words hit me like a slap. The best for everyone. Was abandoning me on my wedding day the best thing? Mercedes. I started to say, but she interrupted me with a dry laugh that chilled my blood. "I have managed to separate you from my son," he continued, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Did you really think I was going to allow a simple bar waitress to ruin my Carlos's future? That I was going to let a girl from your social class, without a university education, become the mother of my grandchildren?" Every word was like a stab. I had always felt a certain coldness on the part of Mercedes, a woman from Valencian high society who had never fully approved of our relationship, but this was different. It was pure evil. But I carry your grandson in my belly," I managed to articulate, my voice breaking. "Carlos and I love each other." His laugh echoed in my ear again. "Love? Do you think love is enough in this world? Carlos needs someone on his level, someone who can help him advance in his law career, not someone who serves drinks in a bar in El Carmen." Tears ran down my cheeks as I listened to his cruel words. I remembered all the times I had tried to impress her, all the uncomfortable dinners at her house in Ensanche, where she made me feel inferior with her veiled comments about my work and my family. "And about that baby," he continued, his voice now more menacing. "Who knows if it's really Carlos's? You work in a bar, surrounded by men every night." Anger began to replace the pain in my chest. "How dare you?" I shouted. "You know perfectly well that I have always been faithful to Carlos." "Ah, dear," he replied condescendingly. "It doesn't matter what I know or not. What matters is what I made my son believe." It was so easy to plant the seed of doubt in his mind. So easy to make him see that this marriage would be his ruin. My mind traveled to the last few weeks, when Carlos had started acting strangely. The calls he'd cut off when I walked into the room, the late meetings at the law firm, his sudden interest in checking my phone. It was all starting to make sense. "You're going to raise that child alone," Mercedes continued. "If you really decide to have it. Although I warn you not to expect any help from us. I have already arranged for Carlos to sign a document renouncing any responsibility." The room began to spin around me. A document? Had Carlos signed something like that? How could he be so cowardly? Does Carlos know he's calling me? I asked, trying to maintain my composure. "My son? Of course not. He is right now on a plane to London, where he will start a new life. I got him a position at a prestigious law firm. In a few months, when all this is just a bad memory, he will meet someone suitable for him." Images of our plans together flashed through my mind like a fast-motion movie. The house we wanted to buy on the beach, the names we had chosen for the baby, our dreams of traveling together. Everything had been destroyed by this woman who claimed to act out of love for her son. "Mercedes," I said, surprising myself at how firm my voice sounded. "I may have won this battle. I may have managed to separate us. But I promise you one thing, my son will never know that he has a grandmother as cruel and manipulative as you." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its previous coldness. Watch your words, girl. You don't know what I'm capable of. No, Mercedes. It's you who doesn't know what I'm capable of. I may be a simple waitress, but I have something you will never have, dignity and true love for my son. Insolent, he exclaimed. You'll regret this. I'll make sure you don't find a job in any bar in Valencia. I have contacts, you know. Do whatever you want, I replied. But mark my words, someday, Carlos will realize what kind of mother he has, and that day, you will be left alone with your money and your arrogance. Before he could respond, I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking and my heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. The nausea came back with a vengeance, and I barely made it to the bathroom in time. As I cleaned my face with cold water, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were swollen from crying, my makeup was smudged, my hair was disheveled, but there was something different in my look. A determination that hadn't been there before. My mother entered the bathroom, alarmed by the noises. Are you okay, honey? He asked, stroking my back. No, Mom, I answered honestly. But I will be. I just talked to Mercedes. I told him the whole conversation, the threats, the manipulations. My mother, normally so calm and understanding, turned red with rage. That witch, he exclaimed. How dare she treat you like that? To threaten you? Antonio must know, we can report her for harassment. No, Mom, I interrupted her. We're not going to do any of that. We're not going to give him the pleasure of seeing us upset. I'm going to prove him wrong about me. I'm going to raise this baby alone, and I'm going to make him proud of his mother. My mother hugged me tightly, her tears mixing with mine. My brave girl, he whispered. You won't be alone. You have us. That night, as I tried to sleep, Mercedes' words continued to echo in my head. But instead of sinking into despair, every insult, every threat, became fuel for my determination. I caressed my still flat belly and whispered a promise, we will be happy, my love. I promise you. We don't need anyone else. The sound of messages coming to my phone continued, but I didn't care anymore. Tomorrow would be another day, and I would have to start rebuilding my life. But for now, in the darkness of my room, I allowed myself to cry one last time for the love I had lost and for the innocence I would never regain. Dawn the next day found me sitting on the small balcony of my room, watching Valencia wake up. The first rays of the sun were gilding the tiles of the buildings in the Carmen neighborhood, and the aroma of freshly baked bread from the bakery on the corner began to fill the narrow streets. It was Sunday, and the city seemed to wake up more slowly than usual. He had spent the night practically awake, tossing and turning in bed, reliving the conversation with Mercedes over and over again. But something had changed inside me. The pain was still there, like an open wound in my chest, but along with it something new had been born, a fierce determination that I didn't even know I possessed. With hands still shaking, I grabbed my phone. I had to do something I'd been putting off since yesterday, face social media. My Instagram and Facebook were full of messages of concern, support, and also that morbid curiosity that arises when a tragedy occurs. I took a deep breath and started writing, "Dear friends and family, yesterday should have been the happiest day of my life, but fate had other plans. I'm not going to lie, I'm hurt and disappointed. But I'm also stronger than ever. I don't need a cowardly husband who doesn't. You can make your own decisions. My son and I will build our happiness without fear and without depending on anyone. Thank you to everyone who has shown me your support. Life goes on, and we continue with it." Before I could regret it, I hit publish. The reactions were immediate. Within minutes, my phone started vibrating non-stop with notifications. Among the comments, one especially caught my attention. It was from Lucia, the owner of the bar where I work. "Ana, my girl, when you are ready, your place at La Taberna del Porta awaits you. And if someone tries to cause you problems, let them face the consequences. Here you have a family that supports you." His words made me smile for the first time in what seemed like forever. La Taberna del Porta, that small bar near the Valencia Marina, had been my second home for the last 3 years. There he had met Carlos, when he and his colleagues from the firm came to have a few beers after work. My mother came into the room with a tray of hot chocolate and churros. "I saw your post," he said as he sat next to me on the balcony. "Are you sure you want to face it like this?" "Yes, Mom," I responded firmly. "I'm not going to hide like I've done something wrong. I'm not the one who should feel ashamed." She hugged me silently, and I could feel in her embrace all the love and support I needed at that moment. While we were having breakfast, we began to talk about the immediate future. I needed a plan. "The first thing is to move out of the Benimaclet apartment," I said between sips of chocolate. "I can't keep paying that rent alone, and besides, there are too many memories there." "You can stay here as long as you need," my mother replied. "Your room will always be yours." "Thank you, Mom, but I need my own space. Especially when the baby is born." I caressed my belly instinctively. "I've been thinking. Do you remember the small apartment that Aunt Rosa rents in Cabanile? My aunt's apartment, just a few blocks from the beach and the bar where I work, was small but cozy. And most importantly, the rent was affordable." "It's perfect," my mother smiled. "And you'll be close to work." "I'll call Rosa this afternoon." The morning progressed, and with it, my determination grew. Sophia arrived after breakfast, bringing with her a folder full of papers. "I've been doing research," he said as he sat on my bed. "About your legal rights and those of the baby. Carlos can't just disappear. He has responsibilities." I looked at her with gratitude. Sophia, in addition to my best friend, was a social worker, and her experience could be invaluable in this situation. Mercedes mentioned something about a document that Carlos signed, I told him. Abandonment of his responsibilities. Sophia shook her head. "That has no legal value. You can't renounce paternity just like that. Furthermore, if we can prove that it was coerced." But something inside me rebelled at the idea of pursuing Carlos legally. "I don't want anything from him," I said firmly. "Or his family. If he doesn't want to be part of his son's life, it's his loss." "Anna," Sophia took my hands, "I understand how you feel, but think about the baby. He has the right to receive support from both parents." His words made sense, I knew, but my wounded pride screamed louder. "Give me time," I asked. "For now, I need to focus on getting my life together." The rest of the day was spent making plans. My father and my brother offered to go to the apartment in Benimaclet to pick up my things. Sophia helped me make a list of everything I would need for the new place. And my mother, ever practical, started making calls to cancel all the services and contracts she had made for the wedding. That afternoon, I decided to take a walk on the beach. The Mediterranean had always had a calming effect on me, and I needed to clear my mind. As I walked along the shore, with my bare feet feeling the warm sand, I began to visualize my new life. I would have to work more hours at the bar, at least until the pregnancy allowed me to. Maybe you could take some online business management courses. I had always dreamed of having my own business one day. Life was not over. He had just taken a different path than he had planned. When I returned home, I found several messages from bar colleagues and regular customers. Everyone expressed their support and indignation for what happened. Even Don Manuel, the old man who came every day to drink his carajillo, had left a clumsy but sincere voice message: "Girl, you are worth more than all the gold in the world. And that coward didn't deserve you." The night came with a new wave of emotions when my brother and father returned from the apartment with my belongings. Seeing all my things packed into boxes, Dreams of a life together reduced to objects that needed to be relocated, caused me to cry again. But this time, the tears were different. They were tears of closure, of farewell. While I was organizing the boxes in my room, I found a photo of Carlos and I at the Phallus from the previous year. Without thinking twice, I tore it into pieces and threw it in the trash. It was time to start again. That night, before going to bed, I updated my WhatsApp status. Sometimes what seems like the end is just a new beginning. Immediately, I blocked Carlos's number and his mother's. I didn't need more toxicity in my life. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. My Aunt Rosa not only agreed to rent the apartment to me, but she insisted on a long-term contract at a reduced price. "We're family," he said simply when I tried to protest. The small apartment in Cabanile soon began to take shape. The walls, painted a soft peach color, seemed to glow under the light coming in through the large windows. From the small balcony I could see the sea, and the sound of the seagulls woke me up every morning. Lucia, my boss at La Taberna del Porta, not only kept my job but offered me more responsibilities. "I need someone I trust to keep the accounts and help with the management," he told me. "And you have a good head on your shoulders." The news of my pregnancy was received with joy by everyone in the bar. The regular customers became a kind of extended family, always checking to see that I wasn't overexerting myself and bringing me small gifts for the baby. One afternoon, while organizing the bar's storage, I found an old notebook. I started using it as a diary, writing letters to my future son or daughter. I would tell him about my day, about my hopes and dreams, about how, despite the circumstances of his conception, he was the most precious gift life had given me. "Maybe someday," I wrote one night, "you will want to know the truth about your father. And I will tell it to you, without hate and without resentment. But I will also tell you how his absence made us stronger, how we learned that true love does not need of broken promises or engagement rings." The weeks passed, and my belly began to visibly grow. Every little kick, every change in my body, was a reminder that I was no longer alone. I had a reason to be strong, to keep going, to turn pain into determination. The response he had given to life, that refusal to be a victim of circumstances, had surprised everyone. But the one who was most surprised was myself. I had never imagined having so much strength within me. Autumn had arrived in Valencia, bringing with it those golden afternoons that so characterize the Mediterranean. 3 months had already passed since that day at church, and my life had taken a completely different direction than I had imagined. My small apartment in Cabanile had become my refuge, and the fishing district, with its narrow streets and colorful houses, had welcomed me as one of its own. That October morning began like any other. I woke up early, made ginger tea to calm the morning sickness that, although less frequent, still appeared occasionally, and sat on my small balcony checking email on my tablet. The pregnancy was progressing well. I was already in the second trimester and my belly was beginning to show under my clothes. That's when I saw it, an email from Carlos. My heart skipped a beat when I saw his name in my inbox. For a moment, my finger hovered over the screen, wondering whether I should open it or not. Finally, curiosity got the better of pride. "Can we talk? Please, it's important." Those simple words made all the emotional progress he had made in the past few months seem to falter. What right did he have to appear like this, after all this time? My first impulse was to delete the email and move on with my life, but something stopped me. I called Sophia. I needed her advice. "What do you think?" I asked him after telling him about the email. "I think you should listen to what he has to say," he replied after a moment of reflection. "Not for him, but for you. To close this chapter once and for all." He was right, as always. After thinking about it all day, I responded to the email suggesting we meet at a coffee shop near the beach, a public place where I would feel safe and could easily leave if things got uncomfortable. The day of the meeting arrived faster than I expected. I chose Café Maritimo, a cozy place with large windows overlooking the seafront. I arrived early, choosing a table where I could see the door and the sea at the same time. The waiter, who knew me from La Taberna del Porta, served me a chamomile tea without me having to ask for it. When Carlos walked through the door, I almost didn't recognize him. The elegant, self-confident man she had known seemed to have disappeared. In his place was someone who seemed smaller, more vulnerable. He had pronounced circles under his eyes and his usual impeccable suit had been replaced by jeans and a wrinkled shirt. He stopped for a moment at the entrance, looking at me. When our eyes met, I could see a mix of emotions cross his face: surprise, guilt, and something else I couldn't place. His eyes stopped on my belly, already visibly bulging under my summer dress. "Anna," he murmured as he approached the table. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." "Sit down," I responded with a calmness I didn't feel. "What do you want, Carlos?" He sat across from me, his hands fidgeting nervously with the napkin. I need to explain to you. It was all a terrible mistake." "A mistake?" I repeated, feeling how anger began to bubble inside me. "Is that what you call abandoning your pregnant fiancé on your wedding day?" "It wasn't what I wanted," he began, his voice breaking. "My mother, she manipulated me. She made me believe things that weren't true." I told him about Mercedes' call, about her threats and her cruelty. Carlos turned pale as he listened, and I could see his hands trembling on the table. "I suspected it," he finally said. "Ever since I arrived in London, something didn't add up. I started remembering conversations, connecting dots. My mother has always been controlling, but this. And only now do you realize?" I asked bitterly. "After 3 months. I went to London confused, scared. My mother had convinced me that the baby might not be mine, that you were cheating on me. She showed me supposed evidence, messages, photos. And you believed him." I interrupted, indignation coloring my voice. "After 2 years together, after everything we shared, did you think I could do something like that to you?" Carlos looked down, embarrassed. "I was manipulated, Anna. My mother has always known how to pressure me, how to sow doubts. But these months in London, far from her influence, have made me see things clearly." He told me how he had discovered that the alleged tests were false, how he had found documents in his mother's mail that revealed his plan to separate us, how he had even paid someone to follow me and take photos out of context. "When I discovered all this, I felt devastated," he continued. "I realized that I had allowed my mother to destroy the best that had happened to me in life. That's why I came back. I needed to see you, explain." "And what do you expect now, Carlos?" I asked, my voice softer but still cautious. "What do you think will happen?" "I don't hope you forgive me," he replied sincerely. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. But our son. I want to be part of his life. I want to take responsibility, be present. And your mother? What about her?" "I have cut every relationship with her," he said firmly. When I confronted her with the evidence I found, she did not even deny it. On the contrary, she defended her actions, saying that I had done it for my good. It was the drop that filled the glass. While listening, I felt a confusing mixture of emotions. On the one hand, a part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to think that the man who had fallen in love still existed under that layer of weakness and manipulation. On the other hand, the damage was done, and trust, once broken, is difficult to recover. "Carlos," I finally said, "I appreciate that you have come to explain. And I'm glad you discovered the truth about your mother. But things can't be as before." "I know," he replied sadly. "I don't hope we go back together. I just want the opportunity to show that I can be a good father, that I can be there for our son." "And what happens when your mother tries to manipulate you again?" What happens when he tries to interfere with our son's life? That will not happen again, he said with a determination that had not seen him before. I have learned my lesson in the toughest possible way. I have lost too much because of my weakness. We remained silent for a moment, the sound of the waves and seagulls filling the void among us. The waiter approached to ask if we wanted something else, giving us a time to rebuild our thoughts. I need time, I finally said. I cannot make a decision right now about your role in the life of our son. I need to think, I need to be sure that this is not just another moment of weakness that will end up hurting us all. Carlos nodded, understanding. I understand it. Take the time you need. I will be here, in Valencia. I have asked for a transfer back to the firm here. I will not flee. Before saying goodbye, he took out an envelope out of his pocket. These are the documents I found, the evidence of what my mother did. I want you to have them, in case you need them one day. I took the envelope with trembling hands. Thank you, I said simply. While I saw him move along the promenade, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. The unexpected turn that this story had taken left me with more questions than answers, but at least now I had the truth. That night, sitting on my balcony, I opened the envelope and began to read. The documents revealed a meticulous plan by Mercedes to separate us, manipulated emails, edited photos, even payments to a private researcher. The coldness and calculation with which I had destroyed our happiness froze my blood. The following weeks with Carlos passed as in a nebula. The Valencian fall was in its peak, and the streets of the Cabanile were filled with golden leaves that the sea wind dragged capriciously. My pregnancy advanced without complications, and Dr. Ramirez, my gynecologist, had confirmed that a girl expected. The news of the baby's sex filled me with a different, deeper joy. A girl. A little warrior who, like me, would have to learn to be strong from the beginning. I decided to call her Marina, in honor of the sea that had given us refuge and comfort during the most difficult moments. The work in the tavern of the port had become my anchor. Lucia, my boss, had promoted me in charge, and although I could no longer serve tables due to my state, I took care of management and accounts. The mornings passed them in the small office of the bar, organizing orders and carrying the accounting, while in the afternoon he took online classes of business administration. It was during one of those quiet afternoons at the bar when I first saw them from that conversation in the Maritime Café. Carlos and Mercedes walked on the opposite sidewalk, apparently engaged in a heated discussion. From my position behind the bar, I could see them without being seen. Mercedes wore one of his characteristic designer costumes, but there was something different in his posture, usually erect. It seemed smaller, less imposing. Carlos, on the other hand, gestured with energy, his face reddened with emotion. Although he could not hear what they said, it was evident that it was not a pleasant conversation. "Are you okay?" Lucia asked, noticing my distraction. He had told him the whole story weeks ago, and since then he had become a kind of maternal figure for me. "Yes," I replied, without looking away from the scene that was developed in the street. "It's just that, it's strange to see them like this." Mercedes and Carlos stopped in front of a nearby cafeteria. The discussion seemed to intensify. Suddenly, Carlos turned and moved away, leaving his mother alone on the sidewalk. The expression on Mercedes's face was a mixture of disbelief and anger that had never seen him before. "It seems that things are not going so well in the paradise of high society," Lucia said with a sardonic smile. "I guess no," I replied, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and penalty. The following days brought more casual meetings. Valencia, despite being a large city, might seem very small sometimes, especially in established social circles. I learned about the usual customers of the bar that Carlos had returned to the law firm where he worked before, but in a less prestigious position than he had previously. There were also rumors about Mercedes. Apparently, they're erratic. behavior and their manipulation attempts had not limited themselves to our situation. Other families of the Valencian high society began to distance themselves from it, tired of their intrigues and manipulations. One afternoon, while making some purchases in the central market, I found my face with Mercedes. He was alone, something unusual in her, and for the first time since he knew her, he had no makeup. Our looks crossed for a moment, and I could see the flash of rage in their eyes, but also something else, fear. He said nothing, but his body language said everything. She was no longer the safe and dominant woman who had destroyed my wedding. It seemed older, more vulnerable. He passed me without saying a word, but I could see how his hands trembled while holding his designer's bag. That night, while I was having dinner at my home, my mother told me what I had heard in her usual hairdresser. "They say that Carlos has cut all financial ties with her," he explained while serving more paella. "Apparently, he discovered that he had been manipulating not only your relationship, but also several aspects of his family businesses." "What kind of manipulation?" I asked, more out of curiosity than for true interest. "Apparently, he had been diverting money from the family business for his own expenses, and using his influence to sabotage Carlos's business relations when he did not want. A complete disaster." The news left me thoughtful. Mercedes's image trembling in the market now became more sense. His world of control and manipulation was falling apart, and for the first time in his life, he was facing the consequences of his actions. The destination, that same that she had tried to control so desperately, was returning each of her moves. The karma, as my grandmother would say, was doing her job. The months passed, and my belly grew along with my confidence and determination. The little Marina moved more and more, especially when he listened to music or when he was close to the sea. I had turned my little apartment into a cozy home, decorated with photos of my family and friends, and a small cradle that my father had restored with his own hands. Carlos maintained his respectful distance, but remained in contact through occasional messages, asking for pregnancy and offering help if he needed it. I had begun to deposit money monthly in an account that had opened for the baby's expenses, although I had not asked. One afternoon, while walking along the beach after work, I met a former university friend who now worked in the same firm as Carlos. "It's as if I were a different person," he told me while we sat in a bank in the Paseo Maritimo. "He no longer allows his mother to interfere with his decisions, and he is winning respect for his colleagues for his own merit, not for family connections." His words made me reflect on how circumstances had changed us all. I had become stronger, more independent. Carlos seemed to be finding his own voice, freeing himself from his mother's manipulations. And Mercedes, well, he was reaping what he had sown. Life in the Cabanile neighborhood followed its quiet rhythm. The neighbors had become a second family for me. Mrs. Amparo, who lived on the floor below, always brought me homemade broths and told me stories of when she was also a single mother, at a time when that was much more stigmatized than now. The bar prospered under my management. He had implemented some changes that Lucia had enthusiastically approved, such as the thematic nights of tapas and live music on weekends. The usual customers joked, saying that my own premises would soon have. One morning, while checking the bar accounts, I received an unexpected call. He was Carlos's lawyer, informing me that Mercedes had tried to legally challenge any right that my daughter could have about family heritage. "Don't worry," the lawyer assured me. "Carlos has already dealt with everything. He has modified his will to ensure the girl's future, and has taken legal measures to prevent any interference from her mother." The news, instead of altering myself, caused me an ironic smile. Mercedes was still trying to control everything, without realizing that every attempt only moved her away from her son and the life she had met. That afternoon, while closing the bar, I saw Mercedes again. She was sitting alone on a nearby terrace, with a glass of intact wine in front of her. Our looks crossed briefly, and this time it was I who smiled. It was not a smile of triumph or mockery, but of serenity. The serenity of those who have overcome pain and found its own path. The revenge of fate had not been violent or dramatic. It had been silent and constant, like the tide that gradually erodes the hardest rocks. Mercedes had lost not only his influence on Carlos, but also his reputation in the Valencian society that he valued so much. And all by his own hand, for his inability to accept that he could not control the life of others. While walking home that night, with the sea breeze stroking my face and Marina moving in my belly, I felt in peace. I did not need revenge or poetic justice. My success, my happiness, and my strength were the best response to all the damage I had tried. Valencian winter brought with it a fresh air and the aroma to orange blossom that characterizes the city so much. My pregnancy had reached her final stage, and Marina seemed increasingly impatient to know the world. Dr. Ramirez had confirmed that everything was perfect for a natural birth at the La Fe Hospital, scheduled for the beginning of January. My little apartment in Cabanile had been completely transformed. The room I used to use as a study was now a beautiful baby room, painted in soft and green tones, like the sea that was seen from the window. My mother and Sophia had spent weeks helping me decorate it, hanging mobile stars and boats, organizing the tiny clothes in the white closet that my father had restored. The last ultrasound had been especially emotional. Marina moved so much that we could barely get a clear image, but when we finally achieved it, I could see her perfectly defined profile. I had my family's snack nose, and Doctor joked saying that it seemed to have the same restless character as his mother. Carlos had been present in ultrasound, maintaining a respectful distance but showing a genuine emotion to see his daughter. During the last months, it had demonstrated a significant change. I attended all medical appointments, had taken preparation classes for childbirth, and made sure that nothing was missing, although I knew that I would not ask for it. One afternoon, while I finished organizing the last details in the bar before starting my maternity leave, I received an unexpected visit. It was Adela, Carlos's younger sister, whom she had always appreciated for her sweet and sincere character. "Anna," he greeted me with a careful hug, looking at my beloved belly with tenderness. "I needed to see you before my niece is born." We sat at a quiet table of the bar, and Lucia brought us 2 chamomile teas without having to ask them. Adela seemed nervous, playing with the envelope she brought in her hands. "Do you know? I always knew that my mother was bad in the head," he started, with a sad smile. "But I never imagined to what extent I could get his obsession to control everything and everyone." He told me how Mercedes had also tried to manipulate his life, trying to fix a marriage to the son of an important businessman, although Adela was already in a stable relationship with his girlfriend for years. "But seeing what did to you and Carlos, that was the height," he continued. "That's why I have decided that it is time for you to know the whole truth." He opened the envelope and took several documents. They were more evidence of Mercedes' manipulations, but these were different. They showed that I had been planning to separate us long before the wedding, even before we announced my pregnancy. "I found these papers in his office when he was helping Carlos collect his things," Adela explained. "He had hired private investigators, had manipulated information in the law firm so that Carlos believes that he was losing cases for your influence. He even paid people to cause you at the bar, waiting for you to make some error that could be used in your against." The revelations left me breathless. The depth of manipulation was overwhelming. But what struck me most was the next thing Adela said. "Worst of all, you are not the first," he continued, his voice trembling slightly. "I did my own research and discovered that I had done the same with Carlos's girlfriend at the university. A girl named Laura. He also moved her away from her using similar tactics." The news hit me like a cold wave. How many lives had this woman manipulated in her obsession to control her son? "Why do you tell me all this now?" I asked, stroking my belly where Marina moved restless. "Because I think you deserve to know what you really faced," Adela replied. "And because I want you to know that not everyone in the family is like her. I want to be part of my niece's life, if you allow me." The tears peeked into my eyes, and this time they were not sad or anger. They were gratitude for this sample of honesty and support. The following days passed in a whirlwind of final preparations for the arrival of Marina. The bar organized a small farewell party before my maternity leave, and regular customers filled me with gifts for the baby. Don Manuel, the old man of the Carajillo, even wove a small blue hat for Marina. It was during that last week of pregnancy when I received Carlos's letter. I found her in my mailbox one morning, and immediately recognized her lyrics in the envelope. For a moment, I hesitated to open it, fearing that I could contain more painful revelations. But something told me that this time it would be different. I sat on my balcony, with the sea breeze stroking my face, and began to read, "Dear Anna, I know that a letter cannot compensate for all the damage that I have caused you, but I need you to know some things before our daughter is born. These months have served me to understand many things about myself, about my family, and about the type of father that I want to be for Marina. I have been in therapy, working to understand how I could allow my mother to control my life in that way, how I could be so cowardly. I don't hope we are together again. I know that bridge burned myself with my weakness. But I want you to know that I am working every day to be a better person, to be the type of father that Marina deserves. I also want you to know that I have taken legal measures to ensure that my mother can never interfere with the Marine's life. I have modified my will, I have established a trust for your education, and I have put clear limits in my relationship with my mother. But the most important thing I want to tell you is thanks. Thanks for being so strong when I was weak. Thank you for protecting our daughter when I didn't know how to do it. And thanks for allowing me, despite everything, be part of your life. Carlos." The letter trembled in my hands when I finished reading it. Marina moved in my belly, as if she had also felt the weight of her father's words. That night, while I wrote in my diary for Marina, I reflected on how life had taken us on ways so different from what we had planned. I thought of Mercedes, how his obsession with control had ended by destroying precisely what he wanted to protect the most. I thought of Carlos, in his process of redemption and growth. And I thought about myself, how I had found a force that I didn't know. The labor began 3 days later, in a quiet early morning. The sea was calm, and the full moon illuminated the streets of the Cabanile when my mother took me to the hospital. Sofia and Carlos waited in the waiting room, while my father walked nervously from one place to another. Marina was born at dawn, with a strong and healthy crying that filled the delivery room. When they put it on my chest, with their small wrinkled face and tightened tiny fists, I knew everything had been worth it. Every tear, every moment of pain, every obstacle overcome, everything had taken us to this moment. Carlos came to meet her when we were already in the room. I saw him cry for the first time while holding his daughter, whispering promises in a low voice. Promises that, this time, I felt that I would really try to fulfill. The days at the hospital spent in a blur of visits, congratulations, and learning. Adela came with her girlfriend, bringing a beautiful musical mobile that they had bought on their last trip to Barcelona. Bar customers sent a huge bouquet of flowers and a card signed by all. Even some of Cabanile's neighbors turned to bring us homemade food. Mercedes did not come, of course. But his absence no longer hurt or imported. We had built a different family, based on true love and mutual support, not manipulations and control. When we finally take Marina home, the apartment by the sea was filled with a new energy. His presence transformed every corner, every moment. Candle nights, diapers, the first bathrooms, everything was a constant discovery. Carlos kept present, always respecting my spaces but fulfilling his role as a father. We established a routine that worked for everyone, and little by little, we began to build a new family form, different from what we had imagined, but no less valuable.